The chairman of the U.S. Bishops Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism tells the faithful racism is a life issue in a video message about the death of George Floyd.
As bishops, we unequivocally state that racism is a life issue. We join Archbishop Bernard A. Hebda of St. Paul, Minneapolis, in praying for the repose of the soul of Mr. George Floyd and all others who have lost their lives in a similar manner.
That was Bishop Fabre in a video response to the death of George Floyd. Floyd was a 46-year-old black Minnesota man who died last week after a white Minneapolis officer held his knee on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, ignoring his cries of distress. That officer was arrested 4 days later and charged with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. An independent autopsy released Monday says Floyd died of homicide as a result of asphyxiation from sustained pressure on his back and neck. Floyd's death, captured on camera, has set off both peaceful protests and violent riots across the United States. Joining us now to discuss is Bishop Shelton Fabre of the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux and the chairman of the U.S. Bishops Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism. He joins us via Skype. Welcome back to the show, Your Excellency. In your video message on the death of George Floyd, you said, quote, racism is a life issue. Can you speak more to that?
Sure. Thank you very much for your interest. I want to begin with an image. My father was a builder, and my father would say to me very often, you know, the foundation of a building is sound. That means that the building should be sound. But if the foundation of a building is flawed, it affects the integrity not only of the foundation, but of the whole building. Now, we know as people of faith, Christ is our sure foundation. And I'm not equating what I'm about to say with with Christ, but Christ is our foundation. But certainly the teachings of the church have a foundation. And one part of the foundations of the teachings of the church is our respect for all life. And that is foundational to who we are as Catholics as we follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. And if that foundation is not sure, then everything that we build on that foundation can be compromised. So racism is a life issue, and we are inviting Catholics to strengthen that foundation, to understand that there are many, many aspects to the church's stand for life. Certainly the horror and evil of abortion, the evil of euthanasia, the evil of capital punishment. Another evil is racism. And so we are saying that for that foundation to be sure, we as people must also come to understand and strive after the fact that racism is a life issue, because if we don't have that as our foundation, whatever we build on that foundation can be compromised. And so that is why we are raising this, because it is a life issue.
Can you enlighten us to how you see systemic racism still present in the United States and how it is manifest today?
Sure. You know, systemic racism is when all of our personal acts of racism come together. So our letter in Open Wide Our Hearts, the bishops say racism can be institutional when practices or traditions are upheld that treat certain groups of people unjustly. The cumulative effects of our personal sins of racism have led to social structures of injustice and violence that makes us all accomplices in racism. So all of our personal sins of racism lead to structural racism, or it leads us to structures that have racism embedded in them. And it's very, very hard to get beyond that systemic racism. For example, the disproportionate number of people of color, of African Americans who live in poverty due to poor education or poor job choices that can be, results of personal racism. The disproportionate number of people of color who are incarcerated or on death row, that leads to product of our personal acts of racism with regard to justice. All of those personal sins come together and lead us to a mindset that this is what is to be expected from a certain group of people, or this is what a certain group of people deserve, or this is all that we can expect from them. So in each of these examples, we can see where societal inequalities or our personal sins of racism have led us to structures that are unfair, or structures that believe that one group of people are not as important, or their lives are not as important. And then that begins to be reflected in the way in which we deal with them, or what we offer to them, or again, it affects the foundation of who we are as Catholics, and that systemic racism is still very much present in our society.
Your Excellency, this week when we turn on our TVs, or for some of us even look outside of our windows, the tension and pain in our nation is on full display. How do you suggest we respond to the death of George Floyd in a way that honors his life and in a way that does not threaten the lives of others?
I think we can read the bishop's pastoral letter, Open Wide Our Hearts, if we have not done so, even if we have, to read it again, to read the pastoral letter, to use the study guide, which can be found on the usccb.org/racism, to use the study guide for small group gatherings and discussions, to encounter people who are racially different from us, to ask a person of color what were they feeling with regard to the death of George Floyd, and to listen to their response not only with our ears but with our hearts, to hear what they are trying to convey, to enter into constructive discussion with one another, being open to allowing this discussion to positively change me. We can educate ourselves. You know, the Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism has offered many materials, again, on the website that can help us to educate ourselves, and then to allow that education to draw us into action to end racism and to seek racial harmony and racial healing. With the knowledge that we then have, then we can begin to dismantle our own personal racism, or to assist others in dismantling their own personal racism, and then together we can dismantle systemic racism that is so very destructive and that is claiming the lives of many people right now. So to utilize the resources and to utilize those encounters that we have, that's something that we certainly can do.
Your Excellency, when we last spoke, we spoke about the disproportionate number of Black babies being aborted in this country. In your opinion, does systemic racism expand into the abortion industry as well?
Yes. Racism is a life issue. And as we know, abortion clinics are located in minority areas. And simply by their very presence, they almost say, you know, the lives of your children are not important, or, you know, systemic racism is so much against you, you should just end the life of this child. So systemic racism is there. Your child, simply by the presence of abortion clinics in minority neighborhoods, your child is less important than other children. So why don't you just go ahead and end the life of this child? So the very system supports, ingraining in the minds and hearts of people of color that their child is less than the child of other cultures. And why don't you just go ahead and end the life of this child, because that's what society wants you to do anyway.
Bishop Shelton Fabre of the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux and the chairman of the U.S. Bishops Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism, thank you for joining us this week.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.